drink champagne, some die of thirst. No way of knowing which way it's going. Hope for the best, expect the worst. Hope for the best.
Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Wednesday, October 16th, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary. With me, as always, senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Washington Commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
And media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
Abe Greenwald is out today yet. Again, Seth Mandel. Yesterday afternoon, the United States government, under the direction of Joe Biden, released a letter that it sent to Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, a sequel to a letter that was written and sent in April, demanding that Israel increase the flow of humanitarian aid and lighten its restrictions on the inflow of aid through third-party NGOs to northern Gaza, or in 30 days, the United States may have to restrict arms shipments and other forms of military aid to Israel. This is Ides of October 15th. Out of nowhere, who's talking about Gaza? Israel's at war in Lebanon, ramping up to strike Iran. And suddenly, out of the past, one more greatest hits medley revival. The April letter that said the same thing has now been re-released by Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and is it Jake Sullivan and Lloyd Austin?
Yes, it is. No, it's Blinken and Austin.
Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. Okay, so please, Seth, as the author of a superb blog post on this matter, let's ventilate a little on this absolutely stunning development out of nowhere, just sort of like a kind of late hit, or roughing the passer moment.
It does feel a bit that way because out of nowhere, because one of the things they say in the letter is Israel is forcing the evacuation of 1.7 million people to a coastal strip, and they're at high risk of contagion. It says it doesn't say what exactly, but then in the next paragraph it says, however, Israel has shown that it can get aid into Gaza and to Gazans when it needs to, because they're doing so great with the polio vaccine. So it's weird because it's unclear. It's like these are very general things. You're putting them all in together at risk of contagion, but you're doing a really great job of making sure that they're safe and healthy, but also they're not safe and healthy because they're in this. There's a circular logic to it. But the biggest part that really doesn't make sense and that it really causes problems is Israel recently slightly toughened its what are essentially customs rules. You go into the war zone if you're bringing a truck of aid, and you have to give your personal identification, like as if you're going through the airport. You have to have your ID written down and all that, passport, something like that, and you have to list what you're bringing in. And this to me sounds like literally the simplest thing in the world, like the easiest thing in the world to understand. If you were driving a truck into the war zone in Gaza from outside Gaza, you should state what's in your truck. It's hard to even understand the objections to it, but the objections are coming from the UN. So this is an important part of it, because the UN had almost stopped bringing aid in because the UN is worried about complying with these rules that state who is in the truck at all times and what is in the truck at all times. And other humanitarian deliveries are not being stopped. So what's happening is the UN got caught shuttling the occasional Hamasnik into the war zone, or allowing Hamas to board the humanitarian aid convoys once they're through the checkpoint, and letting them guide it. And we saw video the other day of them stealing trucks, Hamas stealing trucks also.
Can we point out, I think we point out not at this crossing, but at another crossing, I guess in the late spring, there was this incident where a dozen people got run over by a runaway truck that was hijacked by Hamas, and that the Israelis had to give chase to. And that wasn't Israelis getting run over by a truck, and they had to shoot the drivers and stuff like that. Like, this is no joke.
And they had a standoff with.
Right. And Matt,
can I be cynical here? Can I
of course, but before you're cynical, I want to ask you one question before you get cynical, because I need you to get extremely cynical.
Okay, but I won't be cynical when you ask me this question.
So Israel is simultaneously being accused of depopulating northern Gaza, which it is doing because as it is chasing Hamas down in its final throes of its military and terroristic existence, Hamas has fled to somehow gotten itself north, and is trying to occupy areas in the north, which I can tell you because I have a family member who was nearly killed last week in an ambush of an Israeli arms convoy. So I am very conscious of
in which several of his comrades fell.
That's right. So I am very conscious of what's going on here. So they are attempting to once again shift population away from war fighting. And therefore, if that is happening, which the letter says is happening, then if the trucks come in with aid, there aren't even going to be civilians there to serve the aid to. It is literally asking Israel to turn a blind eye to efforts by international organizations to supply Hamas fighters with food.
I'm going to go out on a limb here.
Yes.
And say, it's not about the trucks. It's about the fact that Harris has not led in a poll in Michigan since the beginning of October. There's one poll showing that her tied with Trump, and all the other polls that you can see on the Real Clear Politics average this morning, she is behind. And there's one thing we know about this administration, which is that it has put foreign policy at the service of domestic politics since the very beginning. And in fact, the entire administration's theory of foreign policy is that foreign policy depends on a strong middle-class America, right? Economics is at home is really the foundation of international relations. And the timing of this letter, which comes out of the blue, as you say, which bears no real relationship to what's going on in Gaza, which deals with the completely different theater of operations than we're focused on, which is the north, which is the assault against Hezbollah in Lebanon, smacks of politics to me. The 30-day time limit gets us past the election. And so for me, it's not only a cynical maneuver, which just reeks of playing for Arab American and Muslim votes in Michigan, but it's a prelude of what might happen if Biden, Harris, if their team, if Harris and her nominee, the knucklehead, lose in less than 3 weeks.
There's also the further evidence to Matt's point. If you look at AOC, for example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she also issued a tweet the other day calling for an arms embargo, saying this is a genocide of Palestinians. U.S. must stop enabling it. And she hasn't actually been saying quite that much recently. But again, it's northern Gaza. So some sort of memo went out there. She has been facing some pressure from her far left flank. Believe it or not, there's a tiny left flank on her.
Can I add, too? You're absolutely right, Christine. But we have been anticipating something like this on the podcast when we would talk about, well, what would the anti-Israel left do when Israel took the fight to Hezbollah.
Exactly.
Because Hezbollah is a terrorist army that occupies what used to be a sovereign nation. Hezbollah has nothing to do with the Palestinians.
Right.
And so now Israel has taken the fight to Hezbollah. Israel is contemplating a retaliation against Iran for its second ballistic missile strike against Israel in 6 months. And what does the left do? Whoa, 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 whoa. We got to go back to the Palestinians. We got to go back to the Gaza. We got to go talk about all of these awful things that Israel is doing to the Palestinians in Gaza. And the Biden administration falls for it once again.
Well, Netanyahu should tell Biden administration to go jump off a pier, except that the pier that the Biden administration tried to build is not in existence anymore.
Okay. So I'm going to ask I'm going to go back to the allegory of Plato's cave and ask you guys a hard political question that there is no answer to, but either they know that they are going, according to Matt's theory, either they know that they are in deep danger of losing Michigan unless they can get 100,000 more votes from Muslims and people who oppose Israel and support the Palestinians in Gaza, or they're going to lose. That they have hard, serious, systematic, quiet, but behind the scenes data that suggests this, and that therefore they better try to make moves to do what they can to shore this up. Or we are in Plato's cave, and that since November, early December of last year, they have convinced themselves of this reality. It is in their mind. It is a shadow. It is not a monster. It is not the demon that is going to slay them. This is not a significant turnout problem in a state as large as Michigan, where there is a population of 370,000 potential Muslim voters and 240,000 or 220,000 Jewish voters. I'm just saying, are they right? I mean, if they are doing this for political reasons, I would hope cynically that they know whereof they speak, although politically I hope that's not true, because I cannot believe that they are doing what they are doing. Why
haven't we seen, why are they the only people in the world who have seen that data? That's why I doubt that this is anything more than the cave. Because
they may be the only people who are paying for it. That's the thing.
Maybe, but they would, if they really had to convince people in their party, when they say, look, we got to put more money towards this race or this race, they usually show at least some of their cards, and other people within the party would be talking about it. There's just this sort of yelling into the void, and nobody has leaked or shown any actual data that contradicts what we've been saying all along, which is that it is highly unlikely that they are at risk of losing Michigan because of the Arab vote.
There's also there's one other factor to consider, and again, I'm speculating here, so take this with a grain of salt. The Trump campaign and lots of PACs have been running a lot of anti-trans ads. And what do we know about Muslim voters? They are not on board with the trans stuff. Yeah. But the Kamala Harris campaign can't actually do a pro-trans ad campaign because most Americans are not on board with what this administration wants to do on the transgender issue. So in a way, they're trying to shore up that base with the anti-Israel stuff because they can't address the trans.
They need voters from somewhere. And look, They already have the vote of the weirdo that Gretchen Whitmer gave the Dorito to in that viral video.
That was about the CHIPS Act, Matt.
Bizarre,
it was about the CHIPS Act.
Anti-Catholic weirdo stuff. So they already have their votes. And so you need this votes from this pool of voters who are either undecided or who are saying that they're not going to support Harris because of the administration's policy, which insanely these undecided voters believe is too pro-Israel. So now, am I saying that Blinken and Austin are consciously thinking about political strategy here? No, I think that they're falling.
Now who's being naive, Kay? I mean, if you're right, of course they're thinking about political strategy. I don't think that they're getting marching orders from Wilmington. this may be retailing freelance on their own because, of course, as you know, this is the biggest threat to democracy since George Washington
Well, that's a good
warned
point.
about entangling alliances, and
Mark
they
Milley
want to do what
says
they
that
can
Trump's
do.
the fascist, and right. So yeah,
Trump
you're
is
right.
the worst person in history, says Mark Milley, or something like that.
Yeah.
He is a dead-on fascist. So
But
they
can I
got to
just
do something.
connect it to what they have done in hamstringing or potentially hamstringing Israel's response to Iran? Because this past week has been this administration saying to Israel, don't hit the nuke sites, don't hit the refineries, don't hit the oil stocks. And through leaks, we hear reports, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not, that Netanyahu has told the administration, we're not going to hit any of those things. I mean, and how does the United States repay Israel for this loyalty, for this, for listening? Now you got 30 days to increase the food aid and lower your restrictions so that Hamas can steal more supplies, or else we're going to limit weapons, just like the French and just like the UK are already doing. It's disgusting.
They also react to videos, and it's kind of like the administration and especially the Harris Walz campaign are living on the internet. Anytime there's videos of Palestinians getting hit with an Israeli strike, the videos spread like wildfire, and the administration and the campaign make statements and do something. But they are in complete reactive mode, not just to party politics and to factional politics, but it's like they're also cruising Twitter, and Tony Blinken and Lloyd Austin saying, oh, that's that video of the tent. We should send Israel a stern letter threatening it and release that letter 2 days later to the public so everybody knows we did it. They seem to be making foreign policy based on the trending topics on social media.
So let's go back to the naked raw politics question, because you mentioned that Trump is behind, Harris is behind. I mean, it's still a jump ball, but I mean that Harris is the polling trend in Michigan has not been favorable to Harris. And then, of course, we jump back to Pennsylvania. Why do we jump back to Pennsylvania? Because these issues are not unrelated. And there are what appears to me to be, by my count, 270,000 possible Jewish voters in Pennsylvania. And we know that there is concern about the Jewish voters in Pennsylvania, not because Harris is doing outreach and is going on, the Yiddish radio station and, talking to, Jonathan Tobin on his podcast or anything like that. We know because the media, that's the Washington Post, the New York Times, and CNN, in the last 4 days, have each done stories about the Jewish vote in Pennsylvania, which says to me, I mean, maybe this is just an assignment editor, hive mind moment, or people are really seeing stuff happening, and that a lot of money is being spent sotto voce to see what can be done to stimulate the Jewish vote for Trump in Pennsylvania, and that Democrats are worried. And Pennsylvania is the bellwether state, or the state that's going to decide the election or whatever. And the Jewish population there is not negligible. It is semi-negligible in Michigan, but it is not negligible there. And we do know that Trump, as is the case with other ethnic groups, with blacks and with Latinos, that Trump is outperforming Republicans of the past. And though subpolling of Jews is very difficult, it's less difficult in New York. And we know that in New York, Trump is in the 30s, somewhere in the 30s, whereas he would ordinarily be in the 20s. And if he is in the 30s in New York, and the New York and Pennsylvania political populations of Jews are relatively similar in their orientation dynamic and issue set, He could be in the 30s in Pennsylvania. That could be 40,000. That could be a shift of 40,000 votes, and that could win him Pennsylvania. So it's not just if you pull the lever in Michigan. This is a national story. It does not only have local implications if you're trying to micro target in Michigan with a message about Israeli behavior in Gaza.
And we should note that
ancillary consequences.
And we should note that in Pennsylvania, Senator Fetterman has been hugely supportive of Israel, as we've noted all along, and he has not paid a political price for it. And Pennsylvania's governor, although he went through all that stuff when he was being vetted for the vice presidential nomination, Josh Shapiro is wildly popular. The reason he was considered the front runner to be Veep is because he is successful, wildly popular, well liked, and Pennsylvania is so important. So the internal Democratic politics in the state of Pennsylvania would suggest that going after the anti-Israel vote is going to cost them. It's not just maybe they won't get Muslim votes, but they are in Michigan, but they are flirting with disaster in the one state they know they can't afford disaster, because if you follow the state Democrats, they are not, jumping into Tentifada protests and stuff.
But Harris hasn't really followed the state Democrats, right? I mean, she didn't pick Shapiro, and she isn't listening to Fetterman. Her position on Israel is not the same. So she's much more, I think, beholden to the conventional Democratic wisdom that Israel is a liability, not an asset, and that in order to show your moral credentials, you have to condemn Israeli behavior in a manner that you do not extend to Israel's enemies when they commit misdeeds and much more brutal and awful acts. So
I think,
I think one other point I should make is that it's kind of a catch-22 for Harris, because you're right, Pennsylvania matters. It's considered the tipping point state. But you look at this Michigan data and, okay, if Trump wins those Sunbelt states, if Trump wins North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona, as he has kind of regained the lead in all three states, he only needs one Rust Belt state to win. She has to sweep them. So, yeah, Pennsylvania's tied. But even if she wins Pennsylvania but loses Michigan, Trump still wins the presidency.
I am trying to look up. So last night, by the way, was debate night in the Senate races all across the country, and I'm trying to find, without triggering the sound of the
what are you looking for?
Ad sound. I'm looking for what happened between Casey and McCormick in their debate about Israel, because there was a question and about it, and I am just going to see what I can do here to pull up what it was that they argued about. I know that Casey said that McCormick is in the pocket of the Saudis. Casey is the Democratic incumbent senator. Dave McCormick, former hedge fund guy, ran and did not win the nomination in 2022 in the Senate race that, had he won the nomination for instead of Dr. Oz, Trump's preferred candidate, might well have won. And McCormick is a good candidate, serious guy. Casey is a weak, though he is the incumbent and has all the advantage of incumbency, is a particularly weak candidate. For example, Casey called, McCormick a wealthy carpetbagging ex-hedge fund CEO. And, he's, and then McCormick said, hey, I was in the first wave of fighters into Iraq in 1991. Like, don't be calling me weak. But the candidates agreed on Israel. So Casey, they out-Israeled each other. And so that gives you an example of as Seth said.
Well, didn't
this
McCormick also told him to outright reject what's her name, Summerlee, the very anti-Semitic Democratic member of the
from
House
Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Summerlee, right? Okay, so here's another thing. There's a Senate race in Michigan that is unexpectedly close. Mike Rogers versus Alyssa Slotkin. And we're not hearing now, Alyssa Slotkin is Jewish. We're not hearing much in the way of Alyssa Slotkin worrying about the Muslim vote. Now, maybe she has just written it off because of her ethnicity. People who are going to vote this way are not going to vote for her. I don't know if they're going to vote for Mike Rogers, who is, a pretty hardline pro-Israel guy himself. But again, there is this Plato's potentially lunatic obsession that it's almost as though in order to justify having gone down this path 10 months ago, they have to continue walking down this path instead of saying, you know what, this path is not really all that helpful to us in the closing days. Like, let's try to win this with another.
So I would want to add something on Slotkin though. I think actually she is been showing signs of worrying about the Muslim vote. In last month the Free Beacon had a story about how her campaign was super targeting her Facebook ads, and many of them were only going to, if you had in your list of interests, Islamic studies, Middle Eastern studies, Al Jazeera, things like that. And they were excluding people who had, if you had like Jewish studies in your list of interests, you were not seeing the ads at all. She's doing something where she wants them to see what she's got to say on these issues, but doesn't really want a lot of attention on, and doesn't want people who are super focused on Jewish interests seeing them on Facebook. So she's been kind of really nervous about this and trying to tiptoe around it, but she's been complaining for a year now about the supposed drag of the top of the ticket on her campaign. When Biden was still, and that obviously that was reasonable, Biden was a drag on the campaign, but when Biden was still the candidate, she was complaining to anybody who would listen. And Kamala, the switcheroo, putting Kamala in there, only quieted that for a little bit of time. And she has recently been again complaining and saying that her campaign has been saying they have private polling saying that Kamala is dragging her and other statewide Michigan Democrats down.
Yeah, I mean, Slotkin has not been a very good Senate candidate, which I think surprised a lot of people in Washington because she was one of the standouts in the freshman class in the House races in 2018. And again, I'm looking more at Michigan now than Pennsylvania. McCormick, he's tight in that race a lot with Casey, but he's never been ahead. Casey said he thinks it's a 2-point race yesterday. I think just globally, we should acknowledge that a 2-point race, but you can still win by 2 points. It is better to be ahead in all of these polls, even if it's just by 1 or 2 points. And Casey, of course, he has the advantages of incumbency. He also has the advantages of his name. The Casey political dynasty is very important in Pennsylvania. Now, contrast that with Michigan. Michigan's an open seat. Slotkin is not a very good candidate. And Mike Rogers has been a very, I think, effective candidate in a state where the Michigan Republican Party basically, resembled Chernobyl before Rogers won the nomination. And it's a state where Trump is doing better in recent polls than he has been doing in Pennsylvania. So everyone's talking about Pennsylvania, but I'm looking at Michigan. And that's why I think it explains this kind of panic on the part of Harris and the administration.
And Slotkin, by the way, we should say, is also specifically a national security candidate. Her right. Street cred is, she worked for the CIA. She was a case agent. She was one of the national security toughies that Democrats brought in to allay concerns that they, were going in this
the current
wimpy
national
direction.
security establishment of which she is a part, and Abigail Spanberger, who's left Congress to run for governor of Virginia next year, is a part. All of those Democrats. It's not exactly pro-Israel anymore. That's the thing. I mean,
right. Now, by the way, one of the reasons that race in Michigan is interesting is that Slotkin is a national security candidate, but so is Mike Rogers. Mike Rogers was head of the House Select Committee on Intelligence, and he is not Trumpy. He is not a Trumpian guy. He is like a George W. Bush type of guy. He's on the board of directors of the Atlantic Council, which is literally devoted to the support and furtherance of the NATO alliance. So that's how not Trumpy he is. And he and Trump apparently seem to be relatively happy to keep a distance between the two of them. This would be a gimme seat if Republicans won it, because let's face it, Republicans are, in the absence of wild surprises in some of these Senate races that we don't even begin to see happening, Republicans are poised to have a 90% chance of taking the Senate by one seat because they're going to win in Montana and West Virginia. There is some delusional fantasy remaining that John Tester might win in Montana, and he is, from what I can tell, 12 to 15 points behind. So that he is an incumbent, and he's an interesting politician and kind of a colorful character. But
that race is gone. But we should say that the Texas race and the Nebraska race are both interesting and worth watching. I mean, Republican candidates in both are incumbents in both races. Of course, the incumbent in Texas is Ted Cruz, who has near universal name ID. But Colin Allred, another Democrat with national security experience, who was part of that, I think, 2018 class.
Yeah.
He's putting up a pretty good fight. And Osborne is the name of the independent candidate in Nebraska, who is kind of pro-labor. He, too, is giving Deb Fischer, the incumbent there, kind of a scare. Now, do I think that the Republicans will lose both races? No. But again, people's attention seems to be like, oh, Tester still has a chance in Montana. No, he doesn't. That race is over. However, if you lose one of these two random seats in a Democratic year, then it becomes harder. You do need Mike Rogers to win in order to make up for a loss of Texas or Nebraska.
Fair enough. Now, they debated, Allred and Cruz debated last night. As I say, it was big debate night. It was very combative, as you might imagine. And it becomes very hard to judge if you weren't watching the whole thing, which I did not. It becomes very hard to judge from the media coverage what actually happened, because, of course, the loathing of Ted Cruz among people who cover politics is so universal that you can't. The idea is that Allred really gave it to him, and maybe he did, and maybe he didn't. But Allred was forced to say all kinds of stuff there, like, how dare you say that I support trans? That's you terrible person for saying such a thing, when that is the explicit policy of the party that he is the candidate of. And this is happening. I mentioned yesterday, it's happening all over the New York area with the seats that are up in New York and in New Jersey, where listen to the ads the Democrats are now running in both these states, and you would think that they were going to set up firing squads on the border. I mean, I am not kidding. Like, Tom Suozzi, who is the congressman from Long Island, has now started running a series of ads called Tough Tom Suozzi. He's there to protect your border. Sue
And
Altman.
he won this special election last year.
That's right.
Doing this, the George Santos seat, he was brought in precisely because it was a Republican seat that had been vacated and they needed a moderate Democrat. And he had already held office, I think maybe even that seat, although I don't remember if the district was the same. But he was recruited for that reason.
This is another, in the top 3 things that American voters are worried about, particularly undecided voters, crime obviously being at the top of the list. And remember that we've heard from the Democrats over and over again, oh, crime is down, we're doing this. It's actually not. There was a revision of the FBI data. Crime's actually up. Violent crime is up 4.5%. The debate over how we report and how many places do and don't report their violent crime statistics to the FBI is a whole separate matter that a lot of thoughtful criminologists are looking into. But it's neither anyone's quote unquote lived experience in cities, as I think Matt mentioned yesterday, or reflected in the data. Violent crime is up. People associate that and the disorder at the border with an administration that, in her interview yesterday with Charlamagne the God, Kamala Harris completely blew off this idea that there should be any acceptance of responsibility on the part of the Biden-Harris administration for the border. She was asked a direct question. Charlamagne basically handed it to her on a platter to sort of make a thoughtful, oh yes, we made some mistakes, but here's how we're fixing it. And she said, no, we did legislation. We did legislation right away. Not true. The legislation came very late in the game after lots of people had flooded across our border. She's not able to even do that, the basic stuff. And I think that interview, both because of its inauthenticity of how she responded, and also her vague swatting away of important policy matters, is not great a couple weeks before the election. And these are the voters she needs most.
Before we talk about that interview, I do want to plug an article that Dave Weigel has written for Semaphor this morning, making the case that no matter who wins the election, American politics is shifting to the right and focusing on some, slight tweaks in the messaging among Democrats more broadly, and also Harris running as a border hawk, running as someone who fought transnational crime when she was the Attorney General of California and the DA of San Francisco, on national security, of course, talking tough in her convention speech. So he makes the case that this is a shift in the feelings of the American electorate toward the right. And I think he has something there. But I would just amend it to say that American politics will shift right for the next 3 weeks. And if Harris wins, as soon as she becomes
hurdle to the left,
president-elect, we'll go back to our usual pattern, which is Democrats run by hiding all of their views and portraying themselves as middle Americans who are completely in the mainstream normie politics, and then get into power and spend their first 2 years in office completely tearing that reputation to shreds. So that's my slight amendment on Dave Weigel's good piece this morning.
But we should talk about I think the main issue that he uses, one of the main things he uses to adduce, and Christine brought this up, is trans rights. And this is one of those issues that, because the liberal bubble that control popular culture and much of the media have a unified vision of the civil rights necessity of trans rights, are incapable of providing us and the world with a genuine sense of how voters feel about this. The only way you can really get a sense of it is from the way candidates are talking. And Republicans believe that this is the killer quiet issue. A killer quiet issue. They are all talking about it everywhere. And they are characterizing it as unwanted surgeries on children and the invasion of girls' sports by people with XY chromosomes. And this is a very big thing. And when Democrats are forced to engage on it, as Colin Allred was in Texas, he rears in disgust at the very idea that he could hold this position, thus indicating that it has real bite, just like we know from these border ads that I mentioned. Democrats have a real problem on the border. We know it from polling, and we know it from everything else, but we know it from their own behavior. And
let me say something about the trans issue and its potency. You know, before the war, before October 7th, this area where I live in Montgomery County was consumed by this because in Maryland, Montgomery County, Maryland, which is what as liberal as Brooklyn is in people's imaginations. That's actually how Montgomery County is, and it sort of feeds into the establishment Democratic part of the so-called swamp here. So it's an important county, and they had a real fight because the county schools said we're going to stop letting parents opt their children out of reading certain books and getting certain trans messages and other wacky things on gender, and they got so much pushback in part because the coalition against that stuff was not right wingers. Chris Rufo wasn't leading the protesters in Montgomery County. This is a place where there's a huge Muslim population and a large Ethiopian Christian population and a Jewish population. The Jews are, Jews in the public schools are less worried about the trans stuff than Ethiopian Christians and Muslims. But these are both those two communities are more recent, have more of an immigrant sort of mindset because they are growing, their communities are growing through immigration. And so they are more likely to object to this like newfangled weird stuff, even though the bulk of those communities have been here for quite some time. They are growing thanks to their, the culture of where they're coming from, and they are outraged. And CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, had a director speaking at one of these rallies and they sat this CARE
anti-trans rallies, and
the gender stuff in general about the opt-outs in schools. He sounded like Rufo or any.
I feel like this is a very intersectional show today.
It's very.
I was going to say
the intersection. On the one hand, the Muslim voters in Michigan, they hate Israel.
African Americans also not on board with the trans stuff.
Yeah, African Americans. We have to diagram this out, I think.
But this is as liberal as it gets. This area, and again. The liberal coalition was a big part of who was marching against it.
Look, in the 18th century, right? Bishop Barkley, the philosopher, made this radical subjectivity argument that you could not know that reality was real because you could only see the world through your eyes and through your own consciousness, and therefore you couldn't really know what is reality. And Samuel Johnson asked what he thought of this theory, said, how do you refute Bishop Barkley's theory? And he kicked a rock and he said, I refute it thus, meaning I have a foot, I kick a rock, the rock is there, I refute it thus. That is that. Famously, the transcendentalist philosopher in the 19th century, Margaret Fuller, after a lifetime of studying and considering, said, I accept the universe. And Samuel Carlyle, the British cynic philosopher, art crit, whatever, said, by gad, she'd better. And this is the trans issue in Chrysalis, which is that you got to be a very highly sophisticated person full of argle-bargle cultural studies, living in this, bubble world in which anything that is considered liberationist is by definition wonderful and to be supported, and you want history to record that you were on the right side of it and didn't falter in the fight to expand the rights of people to be whatever they wanted to be and all of that. And most other people are like, what, are you nuts? A girl is a girl and a boy is a boy. How do I refute this? I refute it thus. God refutes it. When the zygote splits into multiple things, and the first thing that happens is the definition of whether someone is female or male, that refutes it thus. And the last 10 years have led us and have led Democrats down a very dangerous thicket a little like the border or a little like immigration. And again, I remind you, I am like a very dovish on immigration as a matter of course, but like they're like, nah, ignore the fact that this is actually everybody who is doing this is breaking the law in the United States, and that therefore there are somewhere between 10 and 20 million people inside the United States who are here illegally, and every second that they are here, they are actually violating U.S. law. I don't really have an argument against that because there is no argument against it. Just as there is no argument that Rachel Levine of the Department of Health and Human Services is a man. All you got to do is look at her, him, her. Does she want to have me say that she's a woman? Should I call her she when I talk to her? Yes, that's politeness. And, it's fine. And that's all well and good.
But should she be allowed to put that language into HHS and other administrative departments that will then be used to enforce laws and policies that some Americans do not agree with and that are not actually based in biology? No.
And also Americans are the outliers
in a female league. I actually think the sports issue is what's galvanizing a lot of public opinion.
Right, because it's the perfect example.
And if you have daughters, you want them to play girls' sports.
And there are powerful images of young men in women's sports absolutely pummeling their opponents. And we are seeing more of a quiet boycotting, both at the collegiate level and at the high school level, of women's sports teams saying, we will not play, not just because it's wrong, which it is, but because they risk physical harm from some of these male contenders,
and they have to
stronger.
shower with them.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a privacy issue also here that everybody just kind of recoils from. It's like, playing beach volleyball against a guy who can, spike it so hard he breaks your nose is bad. But ask any parent, about the idea that their teammates, are all showering together, which is what was happening in the swimming issue. The swimming issue that brought this to the fore was about the teammates saying, I'm physically uncomfortable with the, non-game aspect of this. And this is something that in any other situation, people would be up in arms over. Our women's comfort in the locker room is not something we ever expected to have to fight for.
That's where this all started, as a political issue that has hit Democrats over the head for a decade. But liberationist ideology does not allow them to separate themselves from it politically. It began with bathrooms. That's where it began as a political issue, was the idea to go non-gender specified in bathrooms in the school systems in North Carolina.
Well, and now they're trying to encode it in Title IX, though. This is where actually I think it has become a national issue. Even if you don't even want to get involved in this debate, it's their side that is trying to draft every American into this debate by encoding these in a federal educational piece of legislation that has powerful reach inside universities and schools.
Right. And so if it's a killer issue in some of these places, if Colin Allred has to sort of react as though Ted Cruz is just being incredibly demagogic in linking him to this, when it is the stated policy of not only of the Biden administration in which Kamala Harris serves, but I believe there's language in the Democratic platform relating to some of this. If he's doing that, Kamala Harris is on the record saying all kinds of stuff about this, including whether or not money should be spent in the prisons in California to pay for gender reassignment surgery. So the taxpayers should pay for prisoners to get an elective surgery to reassign their gender so that men can become women, go into women's prisons, and then beat up women in women's prisons in their new role as women. And I'm just saying that the public, we don't have this flashing at the top of the news or, as a major issue in newspapers, because the decision of the culture has been made that this is an issue relating to humanism and love and kindness, and not going to give air. We're not going to give oxygen to the demagogues and the monsters who want to treat these suffering people who just want to be who they really are as political footballs. But that doesn't mean that the issue isn't there and being breathed in by all kinds of people, including swing voters. My guess is...
And can I make a suggestion on that note?
Yeah.
Muslim voters in Michigan are part of that. No, and it's true because
you're right.
Last year, before the war replaced everything, we watched videos of education board meetings where Muslim parents showed up en masse in the Detroit area and complained about this, and the school board would call them, white nationalists. And then we had articles about how, to be an immigrant meant to fully integrate into American society really just means to fully integrate into the sort of white nationalist roots of America, which is why you're seeing Hispanics in California come out against this stuff and Muslims in Michigan come out. And they got looped in with Nazis, and it was a real scandal. So I would say that that's also in places that they are worried about already. It certainly doesn't help.
Okay, so social issues, if you take what we used to call social issues, though these categories don't really fit anymore. So Democrats, for the first time in 2022, took the advantage on what we would consider social issues because of the Dobbs decision, and basically won that, had a good day on election day when they were supposed to have a bad day, largely as a result of this social issue flipping to their advantage for the first time in 20 years, where voters who vote on social issues are tended to be conservative. And I'm not saying that abortion doesn't remain a key advantage for Democrats. Clearly it does. That's where Harris leads by the largest margin when you ask about issues. But does the trans thing provide Republicans with a new kind of social issue around which to rally? Absolutely it does. I don't think it's not the equal of abortion, because abortion affects every woman, and this is
right. I think the reason that you see so many ads on the trans subject is it feeds into the idea that Kamala Harris is too liberal to be president. And I'm not sure people will go to the polls and vote specifically on trans.
Right.
In the way that people will go to the polls to vote specifically to protect abortion rights. Yeah. However, there is just this general idea that I think is based in reality that Kamala Harris is a progressive California Democrat, and therefore to the left of the median voter in this country. And Trump and his team, or Trump's team in particular, has been very effective at defining her as such. I think that the last 3 weeks of this election will come down to whether the Trump campaign continues to be successful in portraying her as too liberal, too left, and too out of touch, and too weak to be the president of the United States. I think they've had a good week of doing that, but there's still 3 weeks left.
Okay, so one other thing that happened yesterday in the interview with Charlamagne the God, otherwise known as Leonard McKelvey, which I think is kind of funny.
I've
been told that it's Leonard.
Oh, I'm sorry, Leonard McKelvey.
Like Leonard Skinnard.
Who, by the way, is a pretty good interviewer.
He's great.
He is very good.
Talented, talented
really good
DJ.
He has 8 million listeners every month.
But all I want is reciprocity. He can be Charlamagne the God as long as
you are.
I am Continetti the God.
Yes. So he did her no favor. And once again, even in a friendly interview, Harris causes herself trouble because he backed her into a corner.
No. He didn't back her into a corner. Okay. He asked her pointed, totally legitimate questions. And but to Matt's point, part of why I think the Trump campaign did have a good week in emphasizing her liberal position, is that this is a huge mistake on the part of her campaign to keep talking about my values haven't changed, my values haven't changed. But when she's pressed on specifics of policy, as he did press her in that interview, she goes very vague. And that is that uncertainty. Again, I think Matt's right. Unless you're a single issue voter, that vague uncertainty, whether it's foreign policy, the border, crime, trans stuff, it just leaves you unsettled. It left me unsettled after listening to her interview.
Okay, but I'm going to say that he backed her into a corner because he asked her point blank about reparations for Black people. And she said,
she should have been prepared for that. They talk about that on his show.
Well, she said, it should be studied.
It should be studied. Yeah. Punt to a committee.
I don't think
she's going to
that's a good
study the
answer.
maps.
I do not think that that's a good answer.
No, it's not a good answer.
Of course it's
Now,
not.
I don't mean it's not a good answer substantively. I mean,
It's a
for
dodge.
exactly the reason reparations is like the word Latinx or Latinx or whatever. Reparations is an issue that the more it is exposed to the light of day for voters outside a certain, corner of the discussion, the more upsetting it is to people, because it is yet again this idea that there should be unique benefits and unique government supports and unique monies spent on a single population inside the United States. And that is death to them when people really understand that. That's why her stuff this week, where she says, I'm going to give $10,000 loans to Black men only, is, I don't know if you want to go there. I mean, I don't know how you use it or where it's deployed. And it's not like Trump isn't a hypocrite on these things and doesn't also play games with with policies that are directed specifically at only certain people and not others. So he's not the strongest argument for, broad-based tax policy and proper representation of everybody in all policies, which is what presidents should be arguing. But she doesn't need people to say, I don't know how she feels about reparations. Like, reparations is a $5 trillion issue, if you really want to go there.
Well, as she said, we can do it all. That's the other thing when she was asked about,
and I would say, even the idea that it should be studied parallels what's been happening in California, where it began as a commission and has turned into a reality.
Yeah.
And I mean, this isn't, something that's a simple dodge, which I think Harris believes it to be, to say, it's something to be studied, and then she can move on to more pressing matters or try to reassert her message that I don't know if you're aware, she grew up in a middle-class family, and she understands what middle-class people think, and that she has plans for an opportunity economy for them.
Okay, equal time before we go. First of all, she's going to be interviewed tonight by Brett Baer on Fox News, which is very interesting. Trump was interviewed at the Detroit Economic Club yesterday by Adrian Micklethwaite, of Bloomberg.
No, it's John Micklethwaite and Adrian Wooldridge.
Right.
I'm sorry.
I think it was John who did the interview.
Okay, so they're
a team.
They're the same.
They're Micklethwaite and Wooldridge. Why only one appeared? Yes.
It's like Woodstein.
It's Laurel and Hardy.
Micklethwaite, as everybody knows.
Why would you go to see a movie with just Laurel?
Right. Anyway, also a pretty good interview. And I think there's an interesting thing going on, which gets back to the question of whether or not saying Trump is, increasingly deranged and out of touch. Is Trump does what they teach you to do in training school for hostile interviews, which is when you are taught this media training, they say, answer the question you want to answer, not the question you're asked, if you don't want to answer the question. And Trump does that. So Micklethwaite, whichever one it was, whichever pro-capitalist Brit, pro-trade Brit it was,
whether it was Statler or Waldorf.
Yeah, right.
Okay, it was Micklethwaite. Yeah. Okay, it was Micklethwaite.
Micklethwaite. Okay, which is, by the way, I just want you to know, Michael Caine's original last name. So I'm now going to have this connected. It's Micklethwaite was Michael. Michael Caine was Mickey Micklethwaite. Okay. All right. So he says, like, how are these tariffs going to work? And Trump's like, I ate a really good bowl of granola this morning. I can't get, he's like, what are you going to do about Google? And Trump's like, I can't get out of my head this thing I heard yesterday about da 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 da.
He
And
said tariff is the most beautiful word in the English language, or
Yeah.
something like that. It was so bizarre.
and so all day on Twitter, I'm like reading Trump it's senile. He's senile and he's this and he's that. And it was the opposite of being senile. I mean, that is to say, Trump answered every question that he wanted to answer and deflected every question that he did not want to answer. He did not go down. And by the way, this includes questions that he answers hard. And then when he answered questions, some of them he answered horribly, like on tariffs. And I think he is disgraceful on this, and it's really dangerous, and I'm not happy about it. But that was not a performance in which Trump was not in command of his faculties. Quite the opposite. He hit the messages he wanted to hit. He avoided talking about things he did not want to talk about. And I don't know whether or not the characterization of him as increasingly demented is going to have bite. But I don't really think it's true. And then we get to the enemy from within. So Trump is calling the Democrats the enemy from within. And this is McCarthyite, it's dangerous, and he's going to throw people into camps. And his vagueness, again, makes this either brilliant or terrible, because I don't know who they are, who the enemy is. Is he talking about Democratic voters, or is he talking about the deep state Democratic?
Well, in the interview with Maria Bartiromo, he did mention one name, and that was Adam Schiff, Shifty Schiff. He said that, but that's part of the enemy within, which for Trump is more dangerous than the external enemy. But then when he moves, as he does, he goes from thought to thought in a very kind of almost like a platform video game type process where you jump from one platform to the next and they're not necessarily connected. He then moved to whether the military should be used against them. And this is exactly what you're saying, is the them there is unclear. Is he referring to, say, like the Antifa gangs that we actually were kind of in a paramilitary, it was DHS forces having nightly street battles in Portland and Seattle during the final months of Trump's presidency? Is that what he's talking about? Is he talking about whether he regrets not actually ordering the National Guard to suppress some of the violent riots during the summer of George Floyd? We just don't know, because he is, as always, purposely vague and kind of ambiguous. Not kind of ambiguous, he is ambiguous. But the takeaway is that half the country hears it, and there part of that half either really likes the idea or just doesn't care. They don't believe a word Trump says. And then the other half of the country hears it and thinks that if Trump is elected, we're going to enter fascism in the United States.
And I'm sorry, but again, not to what about, because I don't think that this is. I think this is a serious issue worthy of serious discussion about Trump's lack of emotional commitment to the structures and institutions of our democratic republic, and I don't take that lightly. But this is the end of democracy stuff, and these people, Republicans, are all organizing into militias to do this and that and the other thing, and they're going to destroy our republic. So maybe Democrats aren't saying they're the enemy from within, but they are implicitly saying that Trump and his forces are the enemy from within. There's no difference in degree.
Well, both
thematically.
Both use fear as a motivation, which we know to be
It's
a powerful human emotion. Get them to the polls.
The enemy within, it's vaguely, it is McCarthy, but it reminded me of something that recurred throughout General MacArthur's speeches after he returned to the United States and kind of dabbled in Republican politics. He would always talk about insidious forces working within. So it's that idea of the insidious forces working within is a very long-standing trope on the American right, and Trump, of course, recognizes that, feeds it, and of course he sees it as and his personal enemies, the people who are trying to put him into prison.
Well,
and that's who he wants to have retribution against. But other times it does not clear, like he actually knows how he picks up these phrases, because in a separate interview with Harris Faulkner recently, she brought up the infamous tweet from the summer of 2020 where he said, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. And she's like, you tweeted that out? And he goes, I did. And she said, do you know where it comes from? He goes, no, it's something I've heard. And either he's being dishonest or he just remembers it vaguely. It was during the 1960s, during riot in Florida, where the pro-segregationist mayor said, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. But so who knows how he picks these things up, but he is completely reckless in his use of them. And that's what's setting half the country head on fire, because they think that his election will mean the end of democracy in the United States.
There's another thing that we know to be weighing on his mind as well, and that is the reality of the fact that the Iranians are actually trying to assassinate him still actively, from what we know.
Well, this is why, and that's why he should say, that's why he's, I think, substantively wrong.
Right.
The external enemy is actually
it's worse.
It's worse. Exactly.
It's worse.
But he might in his own mind, we do know that the Iranian regime is actually actively trying to sow discord and mess up our elections and, fund radical groups in the US. We know all this. I mean, in his jumble of a brain, maybe that's where some of that comes from too, because his personal fear, he's complained that the Biden administration has not been vigorously
he has not played golf since the second assassination
exactly
attempt.
Right.
That's what's driving him up a wall.
Yeah.
We need to find him a way to play golf. That might actually settle him down.
All work and no play. Not good for Mr. Trump.
He needs his golf.
He needs golf. I mean, American men need golf. There's another connection to the American male that helps explain the gender gap. From what I can tell, American men need Aaron Judge to be hitting homers.
Finally,
and to get out on the links.
Just one last point about Trump in the interviews, and Trump is hiding or Trump is going crazy. The case that the Democrats make for that is highly selective, because he has this contentious interview at the Chicago Economic Club, but he's also he must go on 2 podcasts a day. I mean, at the rate he's going, he's not going to have a choice. He's going to appear on our podcast pretty soon.
Yeah.
But, and in those interviews, he's very relaxed, conversational. He'll talk about anything. This is not Joe Biden unable to string 3 or 4 words in an order that makes sense.
It's true, although he is very hard to follow if you are not up on his brain, by which I mean that he, like most narcissists, doesn't understand that what is entirely clear to him as he is speaking is as clear to others who are listening. And that's the antecedent problem, and you don't know who he's talking about. And again, sometimes that redounds to his benefit because it keeps things vague. But you do get, we talk about Kamala's word salads, and her word salads over the last couple of days have been astonishing, continue to astonish. And it's even more interesting about her word salads. I was thinking about this, that she speaks really slowly. And generally speaking, when people speak really slowly and in a considered fashion, it is because they are attempting to figure out how to pick the vocabulary and terminology to make themselves as clear as possible. I think, for example, of one of my favorite podcasting people, that's Charlie Cook at National Review, who speaks in complete paragraphs, talks very slowly and in a considered fashion, and is a delight to listen to. And Trump speaks kind of slowly. Harris speaks really slowly, and what she is pulling out of her head is she's being
deliberately vague.
But I don't think so. I think it's like she is an AI in the sense that it's what is the word that follows this word, and what is the most likely word to follow that word, and it's a sentence, but it doesn't make anything clearer at the end as it is at the beginning. And that was what I took away from the Charlamagne the God interview.
The difference,
yeah.
The difference in their rambling is, Trump is more like, and I say this as a huge Bob Dylan fan, but I've always said that I respect Bob Dylan's stage bands because they have to know what Bob Dylan song he's playing. And even if it's written in front of them on the sheet, decades ago, Dylan stopped playing songs the way they are on the record, right? And so we used to play this game at Dylan concerts to who is the first one to recognize what song he's playing, right? And even if they're sort of greatest hits, Trump is like that in the way that you know what song he's playing. Maybe he's playing the immigration song, maybe he's playing this, but you know what song he's playing and you know what he says about it. And you can sway along and you get it. Kamala is a new thing. She's not established because nobody knows what she believes. She's not branded as any one thing. You can't even sing along, say watermelon or whatever people do to pretend to sing along to songs with Kamala because you don't know the original songs.
I like that. I like that analogy. I enjoy that analogy that it's like, okay, here comes, they're eating the dogs. Wait, is this they're eating the dogs, or is it we're going to build a beautiful wall with a golden door? It's like, I don't know where we're going with that. Christine,
this sets me up. Yeah. This actually, that was beautiful. This sets me up perfectly for my recommendation. Sorry to interrupt, Jess, but because I'm recommending a novel titled The Door, but it has nothing to do with Trump. It's by a Hungarian writer named Magda Szabó, I want to say. It's Szabo.
Yeah, Szabó.
So this is a book that was written in the 1980s. It was published in Hungarian in 1985. The translation you want, though, there was a first translation in English which wasn't great. You want the translation that's by Len Ricks, and it is the story. It's a very disturbing novel in lots of ways, but it is the story of a successful Hungarian writer and her husband, and the housekeeper who they hire who becomes over many decades not just part of their lives, but forms a very intense and fascinating relationship with the woman of the household. In fact, the husband sort of recedes into the background at some point, and it's the story of their relationship, and it's this very slow unraveling of the history of communism, the Holocaust, all kinds of historical threads that just start to unravel as the novel goes along. And I'm not going to spoil the ending, which is fascinating. But it's the kind of book, a friend recommended it. I read it. It's really stuck with me, and it's beautifully written in this translation. The New York Review of Books has a version of the Len Ricks translation that you can get in paperback. But it's called The Door by Magda Szabó. That's what I would recommend.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we will be back with you tomorrow. So for Christine, Matt, Seth, and the absent Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.